help us remember and celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, please welcome our first moderator, CNN anchor and chief climate correspondent, Bill Weir.
Greetings, Earth lovers. I am Bill Weir, chief climate correspondent and cover of the state of life as we know it for a little network called CNN. And it is my great honor to moderate a couple panels here for the Earth Optimism Summit. I was speaking to a climate scientist yesterday who said something that really stuck with me, which is Dr. Martin Luther King didn't say, "I have a nightmare." He said, "I have a dream." And we can talk about nightmares all day. We want to discuss the latest scientific papers and the predictions for what's happening to our blue marble. But it's so great to talk about the dream of a better path forward for all of us. And on this Earth Week, the golden anniversary of Earth Week, it is my great honor to welcome sort of an OG in this movement and one of the new young guard. Denis Hayes was one of the principal national organizers, the principal national organizer for the very first Earth Day in 1970. He's the president of the Bullitt Foundation. Hello, Denis. Great to see you, sir.
Hey, good to see you again, Bill.
All right. And then also joining us is the founder and co-executive director of Zero Hour. I've had the pleasure of talking to this young lady both on the streets of New York during climate marches and in Washington as she testifies before Congress. Jamie Margolin. Hi, Jamie. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure, our pleasure. So I'm hoping to have a robust conversation, get perspective both on Earth Day then and now. But Denis, let's go back in time. Take us back to the days of forming that very first Earth Day. I'm a Wisconsin boy. I think you are too. Senator Gaylord Nelson was looking for a way to teach people about what we were doing to our planet. And the reaction was incredible. 20 million people, I understand, took to the streets. It was like 10% of the population back then. What worked then, and how do you regard the progress or lack thereof in the half century since?
Well, it was a spectacular event, and all sorts of diverse groups did all sorts of diverse things in literally every city, town, village, crossroads across the land. And they basically were demanding fundamental changes in the way that the country does business. And a look for optimism, I'm guessing you could find some from the fact that this grassroots movement, with very little support in the administration and limited support in Congress, though Gaylord was certainly a champion from the very beginning, it managed to pass a Clean Air Act, a Clean Water Act, an Endangered Species Act, a Marine Mammal Protection Act, Toxic Substances Control Act, Superfund, National Environmental Education Act, National Forest Protection Act, and on in the course of about 6 or 7 years. It was a spectacular change in a nation that had been economically prospering, but at enormous cost to the quality of its air, its water, and its land.
Right. And it seems like, it was the air and the water got too foul to ignore for everyday people at the time. And, in hindsight, it's kind of stunning politically to think Richard Nixon was the president who gave us all of those environmental acts as well. But 75% of greenhouse gas emissions have come since then, a problem that's harder to see with the naked eye, but is going to be increasingly obvious as storms and floods and the events of a warmer, out of control planet go on. Jamie, what is it that motivated you? Since we don't have, mountains of garbage and you can't taste the air in Los Angeles and there aren't rivers on fire like there were back in 1970, what was it that inspired you to start Zero Hour?
I think, okay, It sounds weird to say existential dread, but that's kind of what was the initial. There were many motivating factors, but you have to understand, I was born after 9/11. So not only has, like, the TSA and like, the kind of surveillance state always been a reality for me, but so is the fact that life as we know it on this planet is highly endangered and potentially coming to an end because of the climate crisis. This was by the time An Inconvenient Truth came out, I was like a toddler. So that information about the climate crisis has just always been common knowledge. When I was growing up, I mean, I'm still growing up, but when I was like really little. And so it wasn't like I had an aha moment where I first learned about the climate crisis and then I was like, oh, wow, this is real. It was just kind of something that was always there, like it was just something that's just always been there. And so really for me, it wasn't about learning about the climate crisis and then taking action. It was about collectively ingesting this information and having it be like common knowledge amongst our generation that everything is coming to an end and is temporary. Any beauty that we have, like seeing nature documentaries ever since I was little was always like super bittersweet, because it was never like, oh, look at that cool dolphin. It was like, oh, that's probably endangered. And that was just the norm. And my friends and I would be talking in school, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to do this if the climate crisis won't destroy that by then. It was just ifs, just growing up with like if, maybe, if, like there was no, we're constantly being asked to plan for our future as my generation, but then that future isn't actually being left for us. And even the present is currently being destroyed because the climate crisis is not a problem of the future. It's already here. And eventually, all of this like rage and worry culminated in the 2016 election, which was, I was 14 years old, and that's really when I first started to get involved. Outside of just doing school projects about issues, I was a volunteer for my local Democratic campaign headquarters. That didn't work out, and then I really started like organizing a lot locally in my community of Seattle, doing the best I could, running around Olympia, testifying at bill hearings, trying to get bills signed, trying to get bills passed, joining a lawsuit suing the Washington state government over denying my generation our constitutional rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by continually making the climate crisis worse. And it was just all these actions. And so I was just, my freshman year of high school, I was just constantly on the go in terms of trying to take climate action. But nothing was really happening. And I thought, I was under the misconception that Democrat equals automatically good on climate. And I realized that just because you're not a climate denier doesn't mean you're actually good on climate. And I learned the hard way after trying to deal with many politicians who kept saying one thing and then doing another thing. And so around the summer of 2017, there was massive wildfires in southern Canada and California, and Seattle was like sandwiched in that. And a lot of the wildfire smoke from Canada blew over the city and covered us in like a very thick layer of smog. I don't have any respiratory conditions, but it was still hard for me to breathe and gave me migraines. So imagine what it was like for people with actual asthma and respiratory conditions. And then on top of that, Hurricane Maria hit. Trump announced that he was pulling us out of the Paris Climate Accords. Hurricane Harvey hit, and it was just all these climate disasters. And the media was like, what a large hurricane. What a coincidence. Oh, another climate disaster. What a coincidence. And they weren't drawing the lines or connecting it to the climate crisis. And I was like, okay, something is seriously wrong. I want to do like a big youth climate mobilization. I want to start a youth climate march. And so I posted on my social media, I'm going to start a youth climate march. Who's with me? I got a couple of responses from kids around the country. And from then on, we started 0 Hour and we started organizing, and the rest is history.
Right. Denis, back in 1970, you had to rely on speeches and media to get the message out, to organize folks. Things have changed so much in how we communicate now. Do you think how do you regard those differences now with the online platforms, but that also come with a steady dose of misinformation?
I think you've hit the two big points. One, it is vastly easier now for particularly digital natives like Jamie to communicate with people in other continents and to build a movement that literally can happen overnight. You send out a message and it is in somebody's inbox a nanosecond later. With us, we would work with reporters to try to get articles in newspapers and magazines or on television, beg them to put our street address at the bottom of their articles. And when they wanted to do that, then had worked with them to bag their editors to allow it to remain. And then people would write to us, and some of them turned out to be great organizers. Some of them turned out to be really just great writers and sort of a waste of time in terms of putting together an event. So we sent out regional organizers to try to ground truth, who was real, who was not, and who could actually put together something big in New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and Los Angeles and San Francisco. And in the end, instead of email, what we would do is take their street addresses, punch them out into metal plates in an addressograph machine, hand crank the addressograph machine as we were feeding envelopes through it, get 50 or 60,000 envelopes and put our newsletters in it, stick them in the mail. We'd bring in volunteers to handle all of this stuff and to stamp them, send them out, and 5 or 6 days later, somebody on the other side of the country would get the latest missive from us. It is just a totally different world today. On the other hand, we did have intermediaries like you who were out there then examining the stories that were in front of them, figuring out what's true, what's not true, and doing a job of reporting through what were really then 3 commercial networks and 1 public broadcasting network, unlike the 50,000 different things that are out there streaming today, often with grotesque misinformation in them.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
The parallels between the coronavirus. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I can't imagine what it's like. No, it's fine. I was just saying that I can't imagine what it's like not having the internet to organize, because so much of my organizing, it's not that I'm just sitting there tweeting all day. I do I do like work in person, but it's just like the internet and like different facets and abilities that it gives me. Like, it's just such a crucial part of organizing. Like, all of 0 Hour members are from all over the country. So we meet via Zoom, email, group chats, everything. Like, so much of the organizing is digital, and that makes it a lot more accessible to a lot of people. So I really can't imagine like what organizing is like without the internet. And I know people have been doing it long before the internet. And it's not that I'm just like, like the organizing that people are doing today is still real and still impacting people. It's just, it's so like, I can't even like imagine like how would I have done any of what I did without the internet. So I mean, completely different world.
For sure. But let me ask you this. I mean, today, sadly, one of the many curses of this virus is at a time when we need human connection more than ever, we can't even see each other smile because of the masks, and we can't shake hands anymore, and we certainly can't march in the streets. I wonder, Dennis, if you think Earth Day would exist and all Clean Air and Water Act would exist if 20 million people didn't get in the streets. And Jamie, now that you can't do that, do you think digital organization will have the same punch as 100,000 people marching down Pennsylvania Avenue?
Well, to take that first
Dennis,
question, if COVID-19 had landed a month or 2 before the first Earth Day, we would not have had a digital platform to fall back on. And if there had not been massive crowds demanding change, the political impact that defeated a dirty dozen, that persuaded, candidly, a somewhat anti-environmental president. People have forgotten Richard Nixon actually vetoed the Clean Water Act and was so overwhelmingly overturned by Congress that he never questioned any other things. It was the grassroots that caused this to happen. And the impact of something that caused us to shelter in place would have been just devastating. I would like to, during the time that we have here, a little bit off the topic of what you're talking about, though, say that the problems that we are facing today, the global and international ones that are much tougher to address than things where Congress can pass a law and the Department of Justice and the EPA can enforce it. And if they don't, we can have citizen suits to enforce it. Working internationally, there is no equivalent to that. And I think COVID-19 is calling our attention to that fairly dramatically. The decision by the United States to cut off funding for the World Health Organization seems to me not to be one of the smarter moves that we could possibly have made at this moment in time. and that there are genuine experts out there to which we ought to give some deference at places, again, like WHO, like the Centers for Disease Control, and their equivalents in the climate arena. There's been this tendency just not to trust expertise, and in fact, if people have devoted their lives to studying something, they deserve to be listened to.
I guess
Yeah,
also to answer your question,
virologists warned us for a long time if we devoured everything in the jungle, it would come back to haunt us. Climatologists are warning us of the same thing. I'm sorry to step on you, Jamie. Yeah, to my question to you, how does 0 hour remain impactful, and what changes can you get if you can't have a physical presence?
So, I think digital organizing, actually, it does have a massive presence. Like right now, Earth Day Live has been streaming all over the world since yesterday, and it's going to be streaming through tomorrow. And I think that, people often brush off digital organizing as meaningless and not doing anything. But the sense of community that it brings, the ability to spread awareness, the ability to put pressure on people using digital platforms is massive. And I do think that we can still have a big impact digitally. It's not the same as going into communities and, doing work and things like that, or working within our own communities, blah, 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 or marching in the streets. And I'm not going to pretend that it can replace it, but digital organizing is very, very impactful and meaningful and shouldn't be overlooked. What 0 Hour is doing, we recently launched a campaign called Getting to the Roots of Climate Change, where we talk about the root systems of oppression that caused the climate crisis in the first place. And we're doing webinars twice a day, every Friday, talking about, how different systems intertwine with the climate crisis. We have a different theme each week. So last week's theme was colonialism, and we talked about colonization and the climate crisis, and we held webinars about it. We also did Instagram live streams, different graphics and animations. Also art is a lot more accessible now due to social media. You can download Photoshop. We have a lot of great young graphic designers on our team who make really cool animations and things like that. We are able to record a podcast from our living rooms. And so we started a podcast that is on Spotify and Google Play and all of the podcast places. It's called 0 Hour Talks. And we're able to communicate with people through podcasts, through webinars, through live streams, through graphics, through tweets, through everything, really communicating the message and spreading the awareness that needs to be spread. And then once, the virus is over, people will have that knowledge, and then we'll be able to go back to organizing in person. But we've really been able to harness the power of digital organizing as digital natives who have had these tools our whole lives and really know how to use them.
Right. And I know you have a book coming out called Youth to Power on June 2nd. Can't wait to read that. But we have just a couple minutes left. So Denis, I think people crave sort of actionable advice for those motivated enough to watch this and want to know how they can enact better change. Given your experience, what do you tell them?
Well, I think tying together many of the things that Jamie has said as well about what's possible on the internet, we need to remember that when you're talking about large crowd events, you're really talking about political impact, and there are other impacts that are also important. We streamed the Pope making his comment yesterday. He had originally intended to do it to a crowd that filled up St. Peter's Square in Rome, and then that became illegal, so he put it online for us. We had intended to have 750,000 people on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It's now illegal to have a group larger than 10, and 10 doesn't have much political impact. But in solving the climate crisis, over and beyond the policy changes, the incentives, the regulations, the government procurement efforts, the various elements of a Green New Deal, there are roles for architects, roles for engineers and for scientists and for economists and for business people and for labor leaders and for student activists, and all of those things can be communicated very effectively, even when we are all sheltering at home. They can be motivated to do things that are different in their own jobs and in their own lives. And if they're talking about actionable things, there are changes that when you're aggregating them times, nearly 8 billion people around the world, if we eat lower on the food chain and go increasingly to vegetarian, organic, local materials, to the extent that we don't have mansions, but we have houses that are appropriate to our needs, to the extent that we choose the most energy efficient transportation systems possible, to the extent that we simply think about the climate impact and environmental impact of every aspect of our lives and try to make that as small a footprint as possible because of the desire to leave a better world for our children. The array of things that can be done simply by things as small as buying the most energy efficient refrigerator, the most energy efficient television, most energy efficient washing machine, really add up.
I believe
all of our
someone with
little
a final
decisions add
thought
up.
of,
Well, Denis Hayes.
yeah.
Okay, please.
Oh yeah, I guess a final thought, if people want to get involved with more digital organizing and join 0 Hour, I guess I just want to give people a place. If you want to plug into the work that we do, you can just follow us on social media. It's just at This Is 0 Hour on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and you'll get our live streams and webinar links, etc. If you want to plug in. Even though we are youth-led, we are an intergenerational movement, and anyone of all ages is welcome to tune in. So we'd love to have you.
Very good. Jamie Margolin from 0 Hour, Denis Hayes of the Bullitt Foundation. It was great spending time with you. Happy Earth Day.